Quite possibly the first question raised about this video is, simply, why pick the Council of Clermont from all the many great speeches and moments of rhetoric throughout history? It's simply this: the fascination with the speech that changed the face of the world. Not only did it lead to the Crusades, but, inadvertently, to the Renaissance, and the integration of Eastern ideas into Western thinking on a scale that had not been seen since the Pax Romana. Also, it is a great place to contrast differing versions of one speech, and to see how time and the various priorities of the times feed into the documents and the historiography. In this, I will contrast two versions of this speech. One written by Fulches of Chartres, who was certainly at the Council of Clermont, and was written roughly 5 years afterwards, and one written by Roger the Monk, who it is debated might have been at the council, but was written roughly 25 years later, and with heavy influences from a book written by a soldier in the employ of Bohemond of Antioch, called the Gesta Francorum et Aliorum Hylasoi Maitanorum. Isn't history fun when the words are easy? In the Fulcher of Chartres version, which from now on I shall take to be potentially the definitive version of this speech, or the most accurate to what might have been said, it begins with Urban reaffirming the responsibility of churchmen to care for their flock and protect them from those who would take them away. For God has put you as stewards over his family to minister it. Happy indeed will you be if he finds you faithful in your stewardship. You are called shepherds. See that you do not act as hirelings. Be true shepherds, with your crooks always in your hands. Do not go to sleep, but guard on all sides the flock committed to you. For if through your carelessness or negligence a wolf carries away one of your sheep, you will surely lose the reward laid up for you with God. He's immediately and clearly stating the purpose that he believes that churchmen should have. Now this is important for what will later take place in the speech. He also early on makes clear use of biblical references, particularly to the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. He is also very quick to point out the importance of following the laws of the church. He uses this as an example in the term of simony, which is paying for positions in the church. And be careful that simony does not take root amongst you, lest both those who buy and those who sell be beaten with the scourges of the law through narrow streets and driven into the places of destruction and confusion. Keep the church and the clergy in all its grades entirely free from the secular power. See that the tithes that belong to God are faithfully paid from all the produce of the land. Let them not be sold or withheld. If anyone seizes a bishop, let him be treated as an outlaw. If anyone seizes or robs monks, or clergymen, or nuns, or their servants, or pilgrims, or merchants, let them be anathema. Let robbers and incendiaries and all their accomplices be expelled from the church and anathematized. If a man who does not give a part of his goods as alms is punished with the damnation of hell, how should he be punished who robs another of his goods? For thus it happens to the rich man in the gospel. He was not punished because he had stolen the goods of another, but because he had not used well the things which were his. Now, whilst this may seem like a just general decrying against simony, it's actually very important, as not only is it establishing that people should follow the laws of the church, and not the laws of the land in the sense that it relates to the church, or that the laws of the church are just as important as the laws of the land in regarding this. But also, it's very important that he's talking about robbery. He's using again these continued phrases, repetition of people who are being attacked. Now, this has historical significance, and is later expanded upon in the speech where it talks about the state of Europe at the time. However, it's also foreshadowing this idea of the theft of the Holy Land from the Christians by the Muslims. He constructs a view of Western Europe as one despoiled by sin. You have seen for a long time the great disorder in the world caused by these crimes. It is so bad in some of your provinces, I am told, and you are so weak in the administration of justice that one can hardly go along the road by day or night without being attacked by robbers, and whether at home or abroad, one is in danger of being despoiled either by force or fraud. Therefore it is necessary to reenact the truce, as it is commonly called, which was proclaimed a long time ago by our holy fathers. I extort and demand that you, each, try to have the truce kept in your diocese, and if anyone shall be led by his cupidity or arrogance to break this truce, by the authority of God and with the sanction of this council, he shall be anathematized. Now this is very important. He's making historical parallels. He's drawing back to a better time, one where there was more control over the people of Europe in their manners of their godliness. He's harking back to these days, a very common rhetorical technique. However, he's also using this perception of Western Europe as a method to contrast it with Eastern Europe, essentially saying that while Western Europe seems bad, Eastern Europe is going through a far worse time. Freshly quickened by the divine correction, you must apply the strength of your righteousness to another matter which concerns you as well as God. For your brethren who live in the East are in urgent need of your help, and you must hasten to give them aid which has often been promised them. For, as most of you have heard, the Turks and Arabs have attacked them, and have conquered the territory of Romania, which was the Greek Empire, as far west as the shore of the Mediterranean and the Hellespont, which is called the Arm of St. George. They have occupied more and more lands of those Christians, and have overcome them in 7 battles. They have killed and captured many, and have destroyed their churches and devastated the empire. If you permit them to continue thus for a while with impurity, the faithful of God will be much more widely attacked by them. On this account I, or rather the Lord, beseech you as Christ's heralds to publish this everywhere, and persuade all people of whatever rank, foot soldiers and knights, poor and rich, to carry aid promptly to those Christians, and to destroy that vile race from the lands of our friends. I say this to those who are present. It meant also for those who are absent. Moreover, Christ commands it. Now, this is the call to action. This is the key part of the speech. And it's very inflammatory. It's stating how these, in Urban's view, ungodly heathens are desecrating the lands of the Christians. It's quite interesting the level of connection he's putting between the Eastern Christians and the Western Christians, because, as we all know, that the history between them has been somewhat rocky. But he still declares this a very important thing, and is making the call to all people to join in aid. Finally, it ends with that phrase, Christ commands it. Now, this is not the more famous phrase that will come into use later, but it is saying that this is a direct command of God, very important in the Western world. Finally, in the last section of his speech, comes the theological nightmare that Urban creates. All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. This I grant them through the power of God with which I am invested. This is what caused the theological nightmare for the church, that he is essentially saying that you can cause as much death and destruction as long as it's directed towards the enemies of the church. This, of course, raised much clamour from a lot of people over the centuries. He finally, at the very end, creates this idea that one can better oneself, and is putting into contrast 2 very different camps. Let those who for a long time have been robbers now become knights. Let those who have been fighting against their brothers and relatives now fight in a proper way against the barbarians. Let those who have been serving as mercenaries for small pay now obtain the eternal reward. Let those who have been wearing themselves out in both body and soul now work for double honour. Behold, on this side will be the sorrowful and poor, and on that the rich. On this side the enemies of the Lord, on that his friends. Let those who go not put off their journey, but rent their lands and collect money for their expenses. And as soon as winter is over and spring comes, let him eagerly set out on the way with God as their guide. This is the final call to arms, the call to action of the speech. Everything has been building up to this one moment now. This notion of the decay of Western morals, and the one way in which to fix it is to bring everyone together and go fight the infidel. Now, the speech written by Roger the Monk is immediately noticeably different. Whilst Fulcher's speech begins with an affirmation of the role of the clergy, Robert's speech begins rather more poetically. O race of Franks, race from across the mountains, race chosen and beloved by God, shine forth in very many of your works, set apart from all nations by the situation of your country, as well as by your Catholic faith and the honour of the Holy Church. To you our discourse is addressed, and for you our exhortation is intended. We wish you to know what a grievous cause has led us to your country, what peril threatening you and all the faithful has brought us. Immediately the context of this becomes clear. When you know that it is taking notes from a book written by a soldier in the entourage of Bohemond, it suddenly becomes clear to whom this speech is now referring. It's not referring to clergymen trying to reaffirm the power of the church. It is directed towards warriors who are acting in a holy war against the infidels. It goes on to list various atrocities committed by the Muslims, none of which, of course, appear in Fulcher's text. If you're in any way squeamish, please place your hands in your ears and go la 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 for the next few minutes. From the confines of Jerusalem and the city of Constantinople, a horrible tale has gone forth and very frequently has been brought to our ears, namely that a race from the kingdom of the Persians, an accursed race, a race utterly alien from God, a generation forsooth which had not directed its heart nor entrusted its spirit to God, has invaded the lands of those Christians and has depopulated them by the sword, pillage and fire. It has led away a part of the captives into its own country and a part of it destroyed by cruel tortures. It has either entirely destroyed the churches of God or appropriated them for the rites of its own religion. They destroy the altars after having defiled them with their uncleanness. They circumcise the Christians, and the blood of their circumcision they either spread upon the altar or pour into the vases of the baptismal font. When they wish to torture people by a base death, they perforate their navels and, dragging forth the extremities of the intestines, bind it to a stake, then with flogging they lead the victim around until the viscera having gushed forth, the victim falls prostrate upon the ground. So the list goes on. It's this very inflammatory speech, designed not necessarily towards the kind of religious aspect that is being shown in the previous speech, but more the debased nature that is a result of said lacking of conformity to the Christian God. Let the deeds of your ancestors move you and incite your minds to manly achievements, the glory and greatness of King Charles the Great and of his son Louis, and of your other kings who have destroyed the kingdoms of the pagans and have extended in these lands the territories of the Holy Church. This again backs up this theory. They are taking back to ideas of Charlemagne and these warring Frankish kings. It's not about a call to the churchmen of various lands, it's about a call to the Frankish knights themselves to go back to the glory days of old. Once again, it quotes the Gospel, but instead of quoting Gospels regarding the importance of the role of the priest, it is instead going on about how soldiers should leave their families. This speech is also very interesting in the fact that it mentions quite specifically Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre quite often. Yet, in Fulcher's speech, the city of Jerusalem isn't mentioned at all. But it is interesting to see that what was originally a call for aid to the Byzantines has now become a crusade by the Franks themselves, not aiding the Byzantines, but in driving forth and destroying the Muslims themselves. It then goes on to mention how, after Urban had said these and other things, he so influenced to one purpose the desires of all who were present, that they cried out, "It is the will of God! It is the will of God!" Urban then says that this is proof of the divine providence, that every man came together to cry the same thing, and this is where the rallying cry of the First Crusade is noted down. It is the will of God, which became the phrase Deus vult, otherwise translated as God wills it. This is a very retroactive view, as it is said that whilst there was something along these lines in the Fulcher's version, it has now become the phrase that by the time Robert was writing this had become synonymous with the First Crusade, and he has therefore potentially retroactively engineered it back into the story. Finally, the last piece of proof as to the use of this as more of a military campaign than it is of religious significance is the line, "And we do not command or advise that the old or feeble of those unfit for bearing arms undertake this journey, nor ought women to set out at all without their husbands or brothers or legal guardians. For such are more of a hindrance than aid, more of a burden than advantage. Let the rich aid the needy in according to their wealth. Let them take with them experienced soldiers. The priests and clerks of any order are not to go without the consent of their bishop, for this journey would profit them nothing if they went without permission of these. Also it is not fitting that laymen should enter upon the pilgrimage without the blessing of their priests." This can potentially be seen as an explanation for the complete debacle that had been the People's Crusade. A large band of peasants that had marched across Europe and had been destroyed in the Middle East, that had arrived far before the main body of the Frankish knights. This is in some way explaining the failure, and it is also, again, reaffirming the importance of this being a soldier's mission, rather than that, necessarily, of priests. It is these discrepancies, and the importance that they show, even within a brief period of roughly a quarter of a century, that proves, at least to me, that analysing the rhetorical technique and the differences between the rhetoric in both Fulcher's and Robert's versions of urban speech of the Council of Clermont is important. Thank you.